I'm always on the lookout to try growing exotic or forgotten plants in my garden. When I saw passion flower seeds offered at my local home improvement store, I had to get them. They usually have tried and true common varieties offered, but my eye is able to spot an exotic plant from a mile away. I grew up knowing passion fruit. I even vividly remember a neighbor tending a passion fruit vine in the middle of São Paulo's concrete jungle. So I had to try growing some, at least as an ornamental flowering vine. Because the packet did not have too many seeds, I had to be judicious when starting them. The plate germination method is my go-to method for starting rare seeds. It gives me the greatest chance of getting lots of seedlings from the least amount of seeds. By creating a stable, hot, and humid microclimate around the seeds, I provide the right conditions to kickstart the germination effectively. Passion flower seeds have thicker coats than most seeds, so they may need a bit additional help to get going. Some sources advise lightly nicking the seed coats using a small file to allow water into the seeds faster. But I got a good enough germination by simply putting the seeds on a plate with a wet paper napkin covered with a repurposed Ziploc bag. I left the plate over a warm air vent to increase the temperature closer to the ideal tropical index. If you want to be technical, passion flower germinates best when temperatures are around 68 Fahrenheit for at least 16 hours each day, followed by 86 Fahrenheit for 8 hours. I just put them over the air vent and still got at least half of the seeds to germinate, but they didn't all germinate at once like other plants usually do. As they sprouted, I put them in cups filled with soil under fluorescent light until the weather warmed up enough to plant them outside. I started them very early in the year because I knew I needed as long of a growing season as possible if I wanted to see the vines flower. Sometimes it can be difficult to get passion flower to germinate because of the tougher seed coat. The fresher the seed is, the quicker they will sprout. Old seed can take even up to a year under the right conditions to get going, so make sure to use very fresh seed labeled for that year. Whenever you're transplanting sprouted seeds to soil, you must ensure that the soil is thoroughly saturated with water. Peat moss, a common ingredient in potting mix, has a tendency to repel water if allowed to dry completely. The best way is to slowly add small amounts of water several times until you see the soil is completely wet, not just the top layer. Failing to do so will increase the chances that the newly sprouted seeds dry out and die. With seed safely planted under indoor lights, I just had to wait for winter to pass as vines grew. Sure enough, in a few weeks I had several vines pumping out heart-shaped leaves. The funny thing about passion flower is that its leaf shape changes as it grows. It starts with heart-shaped leaves and then gradually changes to deeply lobed mature leaves. Before planting them directly in the ground outside, I let them get used to the exterior conditions by gradually exposing them to sunlight and outdoor temperatures. As weeks passed by, the weather stabilized and the vines started to weave around each other, prompting me to go and plant them in their final destination. I wanted to plant them in the archway to serve as a decorative vine. I must admit that when I first saw the seeds being offered for sale in the store, I thought these were passion fruit, that maybe if I planted them I would be able to harvest a fruit from my childhood. Passion fruit is an intense acid fruit, usually used to make juice. Its sour taste, once sweetened with sugar, blooms into a delectable tropical juice. Known for its calming properties, passion fruit is traditionally taken as a sleep aid. It also is rumored to reduce anxiety. The reason that it's called passion flower in English is due to the imagery the flower evokes of the Passion of Christ, with the crown of thorns, the 3 nails, and the burgundy-colored robe. While at first I thought that my passion flower could produce passion fruit for me, I quickly realized with a quick search that would not be the case. While the variety I planted did produce fruit that could be eaten, the fruit was tasteless, small, and dry. I was planting Passiflora caerulea. This variety was not the same as the domesticated one prized for its delicious fruit. It did produce a beautiful ornamental bluish flower, however, so I hoped it would look nice climbing my rustic garden archway. It also happens to be one of the most cold tolerant of the passion flowers, probably why it was even offered in my local home improvement store. It was not quite as hardy for Maryland weather though, but it would be able to grow year-round in the deep south of the United States. Would my vine grow and flower, or would I have better luck with a plan B? You will find out in the next block right after this commercial. If you enjoy the videos and would like to support the channel, you can purchase an original painting or drawing in my Etsy shop, or become a patron in my Patreon. Because passion flower is a tropical vine, I had a plan B in mind in case a harsh winter exterminated the vine I had plopped in the ground outside. But first, I had to repot my tropical fern as it had outgrown its current place. My plan was to integrate the fern in a pot together with the passion flower. Part of this fern was dying, so I did not have too much faith in it. Nonetheless, I took it outside and proceeded in preparing a pot to house these tropical plants. I chose a larger blue glazed ceramic pot. It would be an upgrade for the plants. The pot was filled with old spent potting soil. It had housed petunias during the last 2 summers and had not been watered throughout the whole winter. I needed to add fresh potting soil. I wouldn't need to do a complete gut job removing all the old medium and filling it with fresh soil. No, by just removing less than 1/4 of its volume and incorporating new soil, the plants would do just fine. But that is because I had something up my sleeve. Instead of using store-bought potting mix, I had something else in mind. Something a lot more sustainable. Homemade compost. All my kitchen scraps go into a heap that slowly turns into compost. While I've tried doing the hot compost with more precise ratios of green to brown material in a constant regimen of turning, I've settled into doing the lazy cold compost. I just pile fruit vegetable waste up and let it do its own thing. About 1 to 2 years later, it turns into a beautiful planting medium that is very rich in organic matter. It may not have the high amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that hot compost has, but it is still an incredible soil amendment. Organic matter is key to healthy soil, so a little bit goes a long way. When seedlings sprout in borrowed ground, waiting for springtime to come around. I added about the same volume of homemade compost as what I had removed from the pot and mixed everything well. Compost is the one thing I wish there was more of in my garden. Whatever I produced is never enough. Sometimes I have to buy store-bought compost such as composted leaves, especially if I'm starting a new garden bed, but I've tried to depend more and more on what is directly around me. It just makes more sense to use what is freely available and doesn't need to be packaged and shipped. It makes even more sense to use food waste that would be refuse and to turn it into valuable material to grow more plants. As I started dividing my fern, I noticed it had a lot of rotted roots in the center and bottom. That wasn't a good sign. This fern had crowded this pot previously and I had neglected it for some time. It just so happened that most of it was dead, so all I could do was to divide the living parts and replant them, hoping the plant would take on fresh life. This was sure to cause a lot of stress to the fern, and it would most likely go dormant for a while with dried leaves. If you repot a fern and it shrivels up and dies, do not panic. This happens when they go through shock, but I found that if you provide the right conditions afterwards, many times they return, like a phoenix amongst ashes. Ferns can be temperamental, but I think they're ultimately resilient. When seedlings sprout in borrowed ground, waiting for springtime to come around, dream seeds remain over parched earth till harvest rains reignite new. This specimen was clearly choking on the old dead growth, so I had to be a little bit more forceful when cleaning it to repot it again. Once I had all the new starts safe within their new home, I packed the roots with additional soil. Having houseplants enlivens any room during the dreary winter months when we long for green things. I was planning to mix the rescued fern with the passion flower vine. If one of them failed, at least I would have the other. After potting, I made sure to water well. Ferns need moisture. They usually grow in humid forest floors, so you must mimic that environment for them to succeed. The passion flower vines I had planted near the archway had loved their new environment and were stretching out their tendrils in an attempt to reach the sky. I was sure they would soon fill up the archway. If I was lucky, they would flower, but I knew most likely I would not have enough growing days in the season for that to happen. Meanwhile, my potted fern looked hopeless. Almost all the fronds had dried up. It was a bit disheartening, but I knew it would happen. By then, I still had some passion flower vines stuck in the cups yearning to be transplanted. So I grabbed one of them to be housed in this blue pot. I knew it would show much more appreciation to its new abode than the fern had. If all else failed, I would still get a nice houseplant come wintertime. But ultimately, passion flower loves to grow directly in the ground, and this was evident in the ones planted near the archway. They were growing by leaps and bounds, competing with the robust cucumber vines. I knew that the cucumber vines would eventually wither and die in a couple of months. My plan was that the passion flower vine would by then have dominated the scene, providing something pretty and green. I do like to stack functions in the garden. In the end, as summer progressed, I saw signs of hope with the fern. There were new fronds developing. In time, it would regenerate itself, as I expected. Of course, the passion flower was wasting no time, as it spread its vine a bit each day. Towards the end of the summer, the potted one looked better, but not as nice as my other fern I had not transplanted, just moved outside for the summer. It looked spectacular. As for the passion flower, it did flower, but just briefly, once carried inside in late November. It was a promise that maybe next year it would surprise us all.